Billionaire pours coffee on a quiet, elderly black waitress. He had no idea who she raised. What if a single moment of cruelty could reveal a lifetime of extraordinary love? Margaret Williams had been serving coffee at Rosie's Diner for 37 years, her gentle hands steady despite the arthritis that whispered through her joints each morning. At 72, she moved with the quiet grace of someone who had learned that kindness costs nothing, even when the world doesn't always return it. The morning sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting warm light across the worn vinyl booths where she had served thousands of customers, each one treated with the same patient smile. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her uniform, pressed and spotless, spoke of the dignity she brought to every task. Margaret had raised 5 children in the small apartment above the diner, working double shifts and saving every penny for their futures. She never spoke of the late nights spent mending their clothes or the meals she skipped so they could eat. To everyone who knew her, Margaret was simply the kind waitress who remembered your order and asked about your family. But this Tuesday morning would test everything she believed about grace under pressure. The black Lincoln Town car pulled up outside Rosie's Diner with the kind of arrogance that money often brings. Victor Ashworth stepped out, his $1,000 shoes clicking against the cracked sidewalk with each impatient stride. At 55, he commanded boardrooms and built empires, but had somehow forgotten the simple art of treating people with respect. His phone was pressed to his ear, voice sharp as he barked orders about stock prices and merger deadlines. Margaret watched him through the window, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw clenched with each word. She had seen his type before, men who measured worth in dollars and viewed service workers as invisible. Victor's arrival disrupted the diner's peaceful morning rhythm, his presence filling the small space with an energy that made other customers glance up nervously. He slid into a corner booth without removing his expensive coat, still talking loudly into his phone about quarterly reports and disappointed investors. Margaret approached with her usual gentle smile, coffee pot in hand and menu tucked under her arm. She waited patiently as he finished his call, her posture respectful despite the dismissive way he waved her off twice. When he finally looked up, his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had forgotten that wealth doesn't purchase the right to diminish others. The storm clouds gathering outside seemed to mirror the tension building inside the small diner. "Just coffee," Victor snapped without looking at Margaret's face, his attention already returning to his phone as another call came through. She poured the steaming coffee with practiced care, the rich aroma filling the space between them. "Would you like cream, or—" she began softly, but Victor's hand shot up in irritation. "I said just coffee," he repeated, his voice cutting through her words like ice. Margaret nodded gracefully and turned to leave, but Victor's next phone conversation made her pause. He was discussing a hostile takeover, his voice filled with satisfaction as he described how he would eliminate dead weight and clean house of longtime employees. The words stung Margaret in a way she couldn't explain, perhaps because she had watched too many good people lose their jobs to men like him. When she returned 20 minutes later to refill his cup, Victor was ending another heated call about a failed business deal. His face was flushed with anger, his carefully styled hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it in frustration. "This coffee is cold," he declared, though steam was still rising from the cup. Margaret's eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise, but her voice remained steady. "I just poured it fresh, sir. Would you like me to?" But Victor's rage from his phone calls had found a target, and Margaret's quiet dignity seemed to infuriate him further. In a moment that would haunt him forever, Victor stood abruptly and poured the entire cup of hot coffee down the front of Margaret's uniform, the dark liquid staining her pristine white apron and splashing across her weathered hands. The diner fell silent except for the soft drip of coffee hitting the linoleum floor. Margaret stood perfectly still, her hands trembling not from the heat of the coffee, but from the shock of such deliberate cruelty. Other customers gasped, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths as they witnessed something that seemed to tear at the very fabric of human decency. Victor's chest was heaving with misplaced anger, his face twisted in a satisfaction that would soon transform into something else entirely. "Maybe that will teach you to listen when someone's talking," he said coldly, already reaching for his coat as if nothing significant had happened. Margaret's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. "I'm sorry you're having such a difficult day," she said quietly, pulling a napkin from her apron to dab at the coffee stains. Her response wasn't what Victor expected. There was no anger, no raised voice, no dramatic scene that would justify his actions. Instead, there was a grace that seemed to illuminate the entire diner, making his cruelty appear even more stark against her gentleness. The other customers began to murmur among themselves, some rising from their seats as if to intervene, but Margaret simply shook her head with a small smile. She had learned long ago that some battles were fought not with harsh words, but with quiet strength that revealed the true character of everyone involved. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. As Victor stormed toward the door, his phone rang again, and the conversation that followed would change everything he thought he knew about the woman he had just humiliated. The voice on the other end of Victor's phone was crisp and professional, belonging to his head of security. "Mr. Ashworth, I have the background report you requested on Dr. Michael Williams, the surgeon you're considering for the hospital board position." Victor paused at the diner's door, his hand on the handle as he listened. "His credentials are impeccable, sir. Harvard Medical School, chief of surgery at Metropolitan Hospital for 15 years, pioneered 3 groundbreaking cardiac procedures that have saved thousands of lives." Victor's irritation flared again. He was in no mood for glowing reports about anyone. "Get to the point," he snapped, glancing back at Margaret, who was now quietly cleaning coffee from the floor with the same dignity she had shown while being humiliated. "Well, sir, what's remarkable is his background. Dr. Williams was raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs to put all 5 of her children through college." Victor's hand slowly slipped from the door handle. 3 of them became doctors, one's a federal judge, and one's a teacher who runs literacy programs in inner cities. The mother worked as a waitress for nearly 40 years, never missed a day, saved every penny for their education. The security chief continued, unaware of the growing pallor on Victor's face. "Dr. Williams speaks about her in every interview, says she taught them that dignity isn't about what work you do, but how you do it. Remarkable woman, really. Margaret Williams, I believe her name was." The phone slipped slightly in Victor's grip as he turned to look at the woman still quietly cleaning up his mess, her movements graceful despite the humiliation he had just inflicted. The other customers were helping her now, their faces filled with the kind of respect that money could never buy, and Victor began to understand that he had just poured coffee on a woman who had raised not just children, but pillars of their community. Victor's legs felt unsteady as the full weight of his actions crashed over him like a tide of shame he had never experienced before. Dr. Michael Williams, the surgeon he had been courting for months, hoping to add his prestigious name to the hospital board that would legitimize Victor's latest investment, was the son of the woman he had just degraded with such casual cruelty. The irony cut deeper than any business loss he had ever suffered, but it was more than irony that made his hands shake as he ended the call. Margaret continued cleaning with the help of other customers, her quiet "thank you" to each person who offered assistance revealing the kind of character that had shaped 5 extraordinary lives. Victor watched as a young couple offered her their napkins, as an elderly man insisted she sit down while he finished cleaning the floor, as the cook came out from the kitchen with a fresh uniform and refused to let her pay for the cleaning. These strangers were treating her with the honor and respect that her own children, now leaders in their fields, had learned at her table, around her example, through her unwavering love. Victor realized he was witnessing something he had lost somewhere in his climb to wealth, the ability to see worth that couldn't be measured in dollars. Margaret's dignity in the face of his cruelty had revealed not just her character, but his own complete lack of it. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. When Margaret finally stood, her uniform changed and her composure restored, she looked directly at Victor with eyes that held no hatred, only a sadness that seemed to encompass more than just this moment. He knew, with a certainty that made his chest tight, that he was about to face a reckoning that would change him forever. Victor's mouth opened and closed several times before any words would come, his usual commanding presence reduced to the stuttering uncertainty of a man confronting his own moral bankruptcy. Margaret, Mrs. Williams," he began, his voice barely above a whisper as she approached him with the same steady grace she had shown throughout her humiliation. The other customers watched in tense silence, sensing that something profound was unfolding before them. "You don't need to say anything," Margaret said gently, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had weathered far greater storms than this. But Victor shook his head desperately, his face crumbling as the magnitude of his cruelty fully registered. "Your son, Dr. Williams. I know who he is. I know what you've accomplished." The words tumbled out of him in a rush of anguish and recognition. Margaret's eyes widened slightly, not in surprise at his knowledge, but in understanding of the additional weight this revelation placed on his conscience. "Michael is a good man," she said simply, "as are all my children. But that's not why what you did was wrong." Her words hung in the air like a gentle correction to a lesson he had failed to learn decades ago. Victor felt tears threatening for the first time in years, his carefully constructed world of power and position crumbling in the face of this woman's quiet strength. "I built my fortune by believing that success justified everything," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've treated people as obstacles or tools, never seeing them as someone's mother, someone's everything." Margaret stepped closer, her movement careful and deliberate, as if approaching a wounded animal that might bolt or attack. Around them, the diner had become a cathedral of silence, witnesses to a transformation that felt both intimate and universal. "Money didn't make you cruel," Margaret said softly, her words cutting through Victor's shame with surgical precision. "It just gave you the power to show what was already in your heart." The simple truth of her statement hit Victor like a physical blow, doubling him over as if she had struck him in the chest. "But hearts can change," she continued, her hand reaching out to steady him as he swayed on his feet. "I've seen it happen." Victor looked up at her through eyes blurred with tears, seeing for the first time not a waitress or a servant, but a woman whose love had created doctors and judges and teachers, whose strength had built a legacy that would outlast any fortune he could ever accumulate. "How?" he whispered, his voice raw with desperation. "How do I undo 30 years of being someone I hate?" Margaret's smile was like sunrise after a long night, warm and full of possibility. "The same way I raised 5 children on a waitress's salary," she said. "One choice at a time, one person at a time, one day at a time." Victor felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of the tight knot of pride and anger that had driven him for so long. "I want to start with you," he said, his voice stronger now despite the tears that continued to flow. "I want to start by telling you that you are the most remarkable person I have ever met, and I am profoundly sorry for how I treated you." Margaret nodded, her own eyes glistening as she witnessed the birth of something she had seen in her children countless times, the moment when humility creates the possibility for growth. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Victor reached into his coat pocket, his hand still shaking, but instead of pulling out his wallet as everyone expected, he removed his business card and slowly tore it in half, the sound crisp and final in the quiet diner. "I don't want your money," Margaret said before Victor could offer, though her voice held no anger, only certainty. "I never wanted anyone's money. I wanted their respect." Victor nodded, understanding finally flowing through him like water through a dam that had finally broken. "Then let me give you something that has value," he said, his voice steady for the first time since entering the diner. "Let me tell you that because of how you raised him, your son Michael is going to save my grandson's life next week. The cardiac surgery I've been so desperately trying to arrange? It's your son who will perform it." Margaret's hand flew to her heart, her eyes widening as this revelation added a layer of divine poetry to their encounter that neither could have imagined. "And more than that," Victor continued, his words flowing with the relief of long-suppressed truth, "let me tell you that I will spend every remaining day of my life trying to treat people the way you've treated me, with grace I didn't deserve and kindness I had never earned." The diner erupted in spontaneous applause, customers wiping their own eyes as they witnessed a transformation that reminded them of the power of human goodness. Margaret stepped forward and did something that completed Victor's healing. She embraced him, this man who had humiliated her, with the same unconditional love she had given her children. "Welcome to your new life," she whispered against his shoulder, and Victor knew that he had just experienced the most expensive cup of coffee of his life, not because of what it cost him, but because of what it had bought him back. 3 months later, Victor would return to the diner not as a customer, but as a friend, bringing with him a recovered grandson whose heart beat strong thanks to the skilled hands of Margaret's son, and a foundation that would provide college scholarships for the children of service workers, ensuring that Margaret's legacy of turning love into opportunity would continue for generations to come. The foundation that Victor established wasn't just named after Margaret, it was built on the principles she had lived by for 7 decades. Within 6 months, the Margaret Williams Foundation had awarded its first 50 scholarships, each one going to a child whose parent worked in service industries, believing as Margaret did that dignity exists in all honest work and dreams should never be limited by circumstance. Victor found himself changed in ways he never expected. His business practices transformed by a new understanding that true success was measured not in what you accumulated, but in what you gave away. He visited the diner every Tuesday morning, not for the coffee, but for the weekly conversations with Margaret that had become the anchor of his new life. She would tell him stories of her children's struggles and triumphs, and he would share his growing understanding of how wealth could be a tool for lifting others rather than elevating himself. Dr. Michael Williams, when he learned the full story of that morning, wept openly and told his mother that she had accomplished her greatest miracle yet, not in raising him to be a surgeon, but in teaching a man to find his humanity again. The other customers who witnessed that transformation became storytellers themselves, carrying Margaret's example into their own lives and communities, creating ripples of kindness that spread far beyond the walls of Rosie's diner. On the anniversary of that morning, Victor presented Margaret with a gift that brought tears to her eyes, not jewelry or money, but a leather-bound book containing thank-you letters from every scholarship recipient, each one addressing her as the grandmother of my dreams, and promising to carry forward the legacy of dignity, hard work, and unconditional love that had made their education possible. Margaret's response was typical of her grace. She insisted the book belong not just to her, but to the diner itself, displayed where every customer could see that ordinary people doing ordinary work with extraordinary love could change the world. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales like this one. Thank you for joining me on Margaret's remarkable journey, a reminder that the most powerful transformations often happen not in boardrooms or palaces, but in small diners where love has been served daily for 37 years, and where a single cup of coffee became the catalyst for discovering that our greatest wealth lies not in what we possess, but in how we treat the beautiful souls we encounter along the way.